sit with me. Hi there. My name is Jennifer, and oops, and this is the Hear Her Hands knitting podcast. So today I wanted to do a little knitting chat with you all, specifically about the models of disability and ableism. Can we not put our tail? Can we not sit down? So first of all, I'll preface this by talking about the fact that I am a deaf knitter and podcaster. I am what we call multiply disabled. I've been part of the disability community my whole life, and my deafness, my hearing loss wasn't diagnosed until I was later on into elementary school. I was about 9. So I was, to some extent, I was language deprived. I didn't start learning sign language until I was 9. A lot of the issues that I had dealt with previously to that were chalked up to my other medical conditions. But also, I was incredibly lucky, right? I went to public school in the United States in the 90s, which was at the leading edge of the Americans with Disabilities Act and IDEA. So I was fortunate to have access to educational supports that people prior to my generation didn't really have access to, especially as being a deaf person. So I'm married to a deaf person as well, and my partner is from the generation before me. And while he had access to interpreters in school, um, later on, he started out school in the deaf institution system. So he went to a deaf school where he's from, and he learned sign language from other deaf kids and from other deaf language models, which is great. Honestly, like I wish we had more access to that now, but keeping in mind that there's this push pull of the institutional system, like deaf institutes, deaf schools are hugely beneficial for deaf people because we do best learning and spending our lives in our primary language, which is American Sign Language here in the United States. And we learn better in that language as well. Whereas if we're in public school in mainstream situations, while that is the least restrictive environment for most disabled kids, for us it is not, because it's still putting our language access through like a sieve basically. So everything goes through multiple translations. It goes from English to sign language to whatever our primary language is in our heads, and then back out. And that educational system is really, it's not ideal. Like I think myself and many of my peers were very fortunate, and we did well in school, and we managed to survive and pursue the system in spite of everything. But I think now that we're adults, we're fighting for better access for deaf kids in our communities now, which is incredibly hard considering that it feels like, at least in the United States, everything, I mean, literally everything, is going backwards. So, for today's little knit and chat, I'm going to do a little bit of a, I guess, disability 101 explainer for my new podcast audience. Can you not sit on me, cat? Hey, hey, I can't knit when you sit on me. Sit here, sit here. Okay. So, for my new audience, for new followers and friends, I would love to uh, talk a little bit about models of disability and about some of my uh, knowledge, not the word, some of my historical research and background, um, at least as far as these words and systems are concerned, to give you a better, um, I guess, starting point. Please forgive my voice, unfortunately. The hazard of being a disabled person is that I've been really sick. And I had surgery last week, so I'm still like recovering my voice back from being on the vent. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about models of disability. Now, at some point, I'll try to define ableism, but the six theoretical models of disability that are very important when we start talking about um, our knowledge of disability and disability systems, at least where the United States is concerned. There are the medical model, the social model, the economic model, functional solutions to the models, social identity model, and the charity model. So first of all, the medical model is a perspective that views disability as a medically diagnosed biological problem due to genetic disorders, disease, trauma, or other health conditions. So law, especially disability law, this means this definition to critically evaluate whether a person is impaired enough, no, quotes, scare quotes from the wrong place, impaired enough, right? So the law sees impairment in a formation of enough impairment or not enough impairment to receive benefits or accommodations. And this means the person has a problem that needs to be cured or fixed or accommodated or supported. Um, so, for example, when we talk about the law that evaluates whether a deaf person is impaired enough to have accommodations of an ASL interpreter or captions, when we go back into this model and we force people to like share their audiograms or other medical diagnostic materials to get access to an interpreter, we reinforce the medical model. Okay. Some strengths of the medical model are that strengths in regards to how it's viewed by broader society, that it emphasizes the biological, it offers criteria for medical treatment and legal evaluation, and it offers a belief that a compassionate society will invest in healthcare and services to support disabled people. Now, as a disabled person, in my society, I have seen this view of it being a strength really causing more harm to the community and also causing more functional blocks for support, especially when we talk about a compassionate society, right? Like, our society at this moment is in the process of trying to walk back any kind of support for disability that we have created in the last like 50 plus years since the beginning of things like Medicaid and Medicare and the inaction of the ACA. So this model overlooks the impact of design decisions, and it says that it's the person's problem, not the environment's problem, it stigmatizes people as different or as second-class citizens. It can create narrow and exclusive definitions and can be dehumanizing if a person has to prove their disability. So let's talk about Social Security disability, for example. The medical model specifically makes people prove their disability to get supports like Social Security. And the way that system is set up, like I can't say that I have thought of or created a better way. The way the system is set up is incredibly dehumanizing. It forces disabled people to look at the least of their abilities. And basically it forces them, like for example, where deaf people are concerned, it's not a good thing to talk about your skills and strengths because you won't get support, right? And like, in spite of our skills and strengths, we're always going to be deaf. So no matter how capable a deaf person is of getting along in the hearing environment, they still need supports of an interpreter or of captioning systems like real-time captioning. And no amount of strength or ability will change that situation. So when we talk about the social model of disability, which views disability as a condition created by bad design. Society's ecosystem institutes barriers for people in response to the medical model and values for change in the culture and ideology of society to be more inclusive. So the social model of disability is one that comes up a lot when we talk about deafness. For our community is very deaf positive. We're very proud of our language and culture and our system. And so we view everything through the lens of I can do things because of deaf gaze, right? But it basically says that the barrier to our success is hearing world and hearing people's inability to sign, which is true to some extent, right? But I think we have to think about how all these models work together. So the social model has some strengths, and it emphasizes the human right to participate in a society. It removes stigma regarding the disability and inspires creative design. So I think the social model is like there are lots of good, and there's lots of good reasons to use it. But again, all these models kind of work together, and we don't function as a society without putting everything through various models. So the social model is weak in the way that it de-emphasizes biological reality of disability and strips disability from person's identity. So specifically, something like a socially modeled phrase would be, "Oh, I don't see your disability," or "Oh, you don't seem deaf to me," or "Oh, you get along so well. I never would have imagined you had this disability." And that is like non a non-starter, right? Like no matter your abilities or your uh I don't know, your I guess your functioning within the system, that doesn't change the disability, and also that doesn't change the impact of the disability on your life and on your ability to do things, right? So the next one is the economic model of disability. The economic model views disability as the inability of a person to work and contribute to society, and it's related to the charity or tragedy model, which I'll talk about later. But this is basically a huge fundamental basis of what our current society is going back towards, where it's talking about disabled people don't deserve to live or deserve to be a part of society because they economically can't contribute. However, we have to talk about the point that all life is valuable, and it's not fair to evaluate all life based on economic contributions. Like, for example, like a baby doesn't contribute to the economic, I don't know, environment, right? A baby doesn't work. A baby maybe eventually will, but you can never guarantee any of those things. And so the economic model is extremely harmful. And it doesn't help our society to view everything through that lens, especially because that lens is becoming the main lens at this point, where our society is so incredibly capitalistic and fraught. Now, the economic model does emphasize the need for economic support for disabled people and accommodations, which is a strong suit, but it stigmatizes disabled people as needy, and it may deny help to a person who needs it because of qualification requirements. And its economic model is extremely difficult and can be extremely harmful to people in that it silos people into groups of non non-values, right? Um, so next is the functional solutions model, which is views disability as a problem to be solved. Specifically, it seeks to overcome the physical limitations of technology. It cares less about social or political nuances, but rather strives for innovation and as its motivation. Accessibility professionals often live in the functional solution space. Now, when we talk about functional solutions, we're talking about things like assistive devices, right? Like hearing aids. We're talking about assistive devices like wheelchairs. We're talking about the functional solutions often falls into this ideological trap because it doesn't consider all aspects of solutions and all aspects of what the solution will do. The functional solutions model often creates things like signing gloves, which don't consider that sign language is two directional, right? And also gloves don't consider the fact that sign language is very like embodied, and so a lot of sign language has a lot of the grammar is on the face, it's in the body, it's in the shape of the square, in the like distance or size of the signs, and those things are not as easily taken into account for something like a signing glove. The functional model is service-based and can meet people where they are. It focuses on solutions and is a real world approach. However, it is myopic, so it doesn't address broader issues, which I talked about quite a bit. It misses opportunities for social change. It likes to solve a problem rather than change a society. So, and also it sees solving a problem as a very like one problem at a time sort of situation. So, like for example, to solve a problem, we talk about um, caption gloves or the caption screens for movies, and that solves the problem sort of movies not being captioned or open captioned because it but it puts the onus on the disabled person on the deaf person to get access to this device, which is also functionally a small change, and also not incredibly functional, right? Like when we talk about captioning glasses, they're often not charged, they're often not connected, they don't work very well, they drop connection, and so you'll get garbled captions, or they'll connect to the wrong movie suite. And so something like changing the society and having more acceptance of open captions would solve the broader problem, and in such a way that it doesn't make captions such a strange or separate um happening. So the social identity or cultural affiliation model of disability use disability as a community. People who identify with a particular group or culture, deaf people for example, become more involved with the culture and embrace their disability as part of their identity. This is especially true for deaf people because our language, our culture, our society, our community is all very culturally based, it's all very like interpersonally based, and it's very important to us to have the um, connection to the community and the understanding of the community because that grows our ability to understand ourselves, our disability. It is a, there are strong, I don't know, it accepts our disability, right? It teaches us to accept our disability. It teaches us to accept our language, and it also gives us pride, and it helps the group, deaf people, for example, find political strength to advocate for change. A really good example of this, just within the deaf community, very recently, Deaf President Now came out as a movie on, I believe, Netflix? No, on Apple. So Now DeMarco, um, and many deaf community members worked on this. And this movie is important for documenting our history, but also it shows some of the weaknesses within the group history, um, where deaf people don't acknowledge or record um, our intercommunication or inter-community bonds and growth with other communities outside the deaf group. So, like, deaf people learned um, about protest and about activism for the Deaf President Now protest. Like, a lot of our knowledge base came from Black activists. It came from the Black Panther Party. It came from the earlier disability rights movement, which also came from the Black Panther Party. Like a lot of Black activists worked with the disability community to um, open up what's it called, independent living centers and to work towards getting disabled people out of institutions and out of warehousing into the broader community where we could thrive and grow. Now, I think I know deaf people struggle a lot with the other side of the social identity cultural affiliation model is that a lot of times we feel excluded or don't we get excluded based on all sorts of things like how you sign if you speak. If you were raised with a deaf family, if your parents or grandparents were deaf, if all your parents are hearing, if you happen to be part of the 10% of deaf, 10%, no, 90% of deaf kids born to hearing parents, right? And it's easy to become alienated from the deaf community or from the disability community when you feel like you don't fit, and it's an extreme fight to find your identity within that community because the community can be so insular. So the charity model or the tragedy model views disability as tragic, unfortunate, or inspirational, which when this perspective becomes an attitude, it can become offensive to disabled people. We use lots of different words to describe this, and they have gone in and out of vogue over time. But basically, disabled people generally feel really strange about being inspirational just for existing, right? Like, I think it's one thing to be inspired by a disabled person who does something extremely inspirational, like wins a Special Olympics medal, right? But also that feels awkward because for us, I think um, there's a lot of pride in being involved with these like small group um, events, like the Special Olympics, or in my case, in the Deaf Olympics. Like, there's a lot of pride to be involved with those groups, but also it's it's difficult because you feel like there's more inspiration from being able to compete with the abled populace and not disabled, Olympians or whatever. So this model does help our community in that it inspires fundraisers, projects, assistance, and interventions. It inspires things like, I don't know, various groups to raise money for things like, for example, when I was growing up, assistive devices, hearing aids, not that it's changed, but assistive devices are incredibly expensive. And many of us, like our parents, didn't have the ability to pay for those. And so groups like, what are they called? The Lions Club? Is that what I'm thinking of? I can't remember. There were like various like social groups that raised money to help parents buy their kids hearing aids or surgeries or medication or whatever else. Like, so that is like the strength of the charity or tragedy model, but also it's a difficult difficult section, not the word I want. The difficulty of that model is that it creates an unhealthy hierarchy or social relationship within those communities, right? So these clubs would feel um, condescending or dehumanizing towards disabled people because they help them. Also, it perpetuates the lie that disabled people are objects of inspiration, and it's a short-term support, right? It's not a thing like a social change, like Medicaid is, where it doesn't change the support systems. It's a one-time support that that thing will eventually wear out and die and need to be replaced, and that one-time support may or may not be there when you need it again. So other models of disability are the affirmation model, which views disability as a chance to affirm one identity, celebrate that part of oneself. Also, the social political model, which views disability needs as a human right, and the religious or moral model, which views disability as an act of God to punish or teach. And that last one is definitely extremely disliked by our community in general because, right, I cannot name how incredibly um, demoralizing it is to have someone say, "Oh, I'll pray for you," or like, "Pray for you." like lay hands on to pray for you, specifically to remove a part of you that you are proud of. Like when people would pray that I would get my hearing back, I'm like, I've been deaf my whole life. Like praying to remove my deafness is like praying to carve out a piece of who I am. The expert or professional view of disability is a variation on the medical model. It views disability as a condition to be treated or managed. And that particular model puts disabled people and patients below their carers and doctors, and can be incredibly difficult because they're constantly being devalued of their experience. The rehabilitation model views disability as a condition to be treated with therapy and rehabilitation, or another view as something to be fixed. Can you think of any other models I haven't mentioned? I'm sure there are. If you thought this chat was interesting, can you describe a time for me when you have experienced or witnessed the medical model of disability in action? Can you explain how this interaction would have been different if handled or viewed through the social model of disability instead? Which model do you believe is more prevalent where you live or right now? And why do you think this is the case? And explain your opinions about the models. Do you agree with either or both of those, the medical and the social? Do you have other views regarding the treatment of disabled people that do not fit into one of those models? I would love to hear from you. And that concludes my little chat on models of disability. And maybe I will come back and do a chat another month about other things regarding disability and ableism.